Why being feared beats being loved. Machiavelli explains, what if everything you were taught about being a good person was wrong? What if the path to power, influence, and even peace wasn't paved with kindness, compassion, or the desire to be loved, but with fear? That's not just a provocative question. It's the central idea behind one of the most misunderstood, yet enduring works of political philosophy ever written, The Prince by Niccolò Machiavelli. And today we're going to go deeper than the memes, deeper than the cliches, and straight into the fire. Why being feared beats being loved. Not just in politics or power games, but in everyday life, your relationships, your career, your internal world. Because what Machiavelli really showed us wasn't how to be cruel. He showed us how to survive, and if you dare to understand him, he might just change the way you see everything. Let's start with the moment that made Machiavelli infamous. He wrote, "It is better to be feared than loved, if you cannot be both." That line has sparked centuries of debate, outrage, and fascination. But pause and reflect, what's the world actually like? In your own life, have you ever noticed how people treat you when they fear letting you down versus when they simply like you? Do people respect boundaries more when you're kind or when you're commanding? Do they keep their promises when they admire you or when they're afraid of disappointing you? We like to think love is more powerful than fear, but Machiavelli saw through that sentimentality. He saw how people really behave, not how we wish they would. And this is where the philosophical weight of his insight hits. He wasn't advocating cruelty for its own sake. He was confronting the reality that humans are self-interested, were unpredictable, and often driven by fear more than reason. Now, I know what you're thinking. Fear sounds harsh. It sounds immoral. It sounds like something villains use to control people. But here's where we need to look deeper. Fear, in Machiavelli's sense, isn't about terror or abuse. It's about respect. It's about authority. It's about being taken seriously. You see, love is voluntary. It's emotional, it's soft, and while it can inspire loyalty, it's also fragile. It depends on constant maintenance. One mistake, and affection can turn to resentment. But fear, when used wisely, is stable, predictable. People don't betray you when they fear the consequences. They don't cross your lines when they know you mean what you say. And in a world full of chaos, that kind of reliability is powerful.
Click subscribe to this channel to get more profound insights.
But Machiavelli didn't stop there. He understood something even deeper. The problem isn't fear or love, it's dependence. If your power depends on being liked, you're never in control. You're always performing. You're always vulnerable to the shifting emotions of other people. But when you are respected, when people understand that your kindness comes with limits, that's when your strength becomes real. That's when you stop being a performer and become a leader. And here's the wild part. People often end up loving those they fear, because fear, when wielded with stability and fairness, breeds admiration. It signals that you have backbone, that you're not to be manipulated. And in a strange twist, that kind of strength is magnetic. So ask yourself, are you being loved, or are you being used? Are people drawn to your kindness because they respect you, or because they know you won't say no? This is where Machiavelli forces us to confront uncomfortable truths. We all want to be liked, but how often does that desire lead us to compromise our boundaries? How often do we give too much, tolerate too much, say yes when we mean no just to avoid conflict. And what's the cost of that? Lost time, resentment, weakness disguised as virtue. The desire to be loved becomes a trap. It makes us soft when we should be strong. It makes us passive when we should be assertive. Machiavelli's genius wasn't just in understanding politics, it was in understanding human nature. He knew that people are inconsistent, emotional, and often driven by fear of loss more than appreciation of gain. And if you want to lead, whether that's a nation or your own life, you have to account for that. You can't build your foundation on the shifting sands of affection. You need stone. And fear again, not terror, but respect is that stone. But here's where it gets even more interesting. Machiavelli wasn't saying you should never be loved. He actually encouraged rulers to appear merciful, generous, and just. He knew appearances mattered. But he also knew that appearances without substance are dangerous. A prince who is loved but weak invites betrayal. A prince who is feared but fair invites obedience and often admiration. So the real challenge is balance. Be kind but firm. Be generous but clear. Show love, but don't depend on it. Let people admire your humanity, but always remind them of your strength. This isn't just political advice, it's personal transformation. Think about your own relationships, your work, your goals. How much more powerful would you be if you didn't need to be liked? How much more focused? How much more free? Because at the heart of Machiavelli's philosophy is a question we all need to ask ourselves. Would you rather be loved and powerless, or feared and free? The shadow within, how power reveals who you really are. Power doesn't create monsters, it reveals them. That's the uncomfortable truth many of us spend our whole lives avoiding. We like to believe that if we were ever given real power over others, over ourselves, over our circumstances, we would remain kind, fair, and gentle. But Machiavelli knew better. He understood that power is not a costume you wear, it's a mirror you hold up to your soul. It strips away the pretense. It dissolves the performance. Power doesn't corrupt, it exposes. And that's why being feared, rather than loved, is the safer path, not just politically, but psychologically. Because when you acknowledge your capacity for control, for dominance, for discipline, you stop lying to yourself about who you are. You begin to embrace the shadow within you, and instead of being ruled by it unconsciously, you learn how to wield it. Think about the times you've been given even a little power, maybe at work, in a relationship, in a group setting. Were you tempted to manipulate someone? Did you feel the rush of being obeyed, listened to, or feared? That's your shadow speaking. And the mistake isn't in hearing it, the mistake is in pretending it isn't there. You see, most people live in denial of their darker instincts. They suppress their ambition, their aggression, their desire to dominate, because they've been taught those impulses are evil. But Machiavelli flips the script. He says, no, those impulses are natural. They're part of the human toolkit. The danger isn't in having a shadow, it's in refusing to learn how to control it. Because the moment you pretend your shadow doesn't exist, it starts controlling you. This is where the fear vs. love debate gets even deeper. You might think seeking to be feared means losing your humanity. But the opposite is true. Being feared again, not through cruelty, but through unmistakable strength, requires a high level of self-awareness. It demands discipline. It forces you to confront the parts of yourself that want to be liked at all costs and ask, what am I giving up by chasing approval? Am I compromising my values? Am I shrinking to fit someone else's comfort zone? And once you start asking those questions, you begin to see that the desire to be loved often comes from weakness, while the ability to be feared stems from clarity. Here's the thing, people don't follow the most lovable leader. They follow the one who makes them feel something real. And often, that feeling is a mix of respect, awe, and yes, fear. Not because they think that leader will hurt them, but because they know that leader has boundaries, standards, non-negotiables. That leader isn't afraid to be unpopular, to say no, to stand alone. That leader has integrated their shadow. They've looked into the mirror that power holds up and said, I see who I am, and I'm not running from it. Can you say the same? Let's turn the lens inward. In your own life, how often do you soften your words so others won't feel uncomfortable? How often do you hide your ambitions so you won't appear arrogant? How often do you agree just to avoid conflict? Now imagine what would happen if you stopped doing that. If you stopped performing lovability and started cultivating command. What doors would open? What people would fall away? What truths would finally emerge? That's the path Machiavelli invites us to explore, not to become tyrants, but to become real. To stop hiding behind the illusion of goodness and start forging an identity rooted in strength. Because here's the twist most people miss. When you integrate your inner power, people don't just fear you, they trust you. They know you won't bend under pressure. They know you won't lie to please them. They know you're not swayed by flattery or manipulated by guilt. And in a world full of pretenders, that kind of authenticity is rare. It's magnetic. It may not make you universally loved, but it will make you deeply respected. And that's the foundation not just of leadership, but of freedom. So let me leave you with a question. If you were given absolute power for a day, no consequences, no judgment, what would you do? Would you build? Destroy? Reveal? Hide? That answer, whatever it is not just about fantasy. It's a window into your shadow, and if you're brave enough to listen, it might show you who you really are. The art of necessary cruelty. Why mercy can sometimes be the most dangerous choice. We're taught from childhood that mercy is always noble, that forgiveness is a higher moral ground, and that cruelty, in all its forms, is evil. But what if that's not always true? What if mercy, when given at the wrong time, to the wrong people, isn't a sign of virtue, but a symptom of weakness? What if cruelty, when used with precision and purpose, is not wickedness, but wisdom? This is where Machiavelli enters the conversation with a blade in hand and a cold, clear gaze. He doesn't flinch at hard truths. He tells us plainly, cruelty, when necessary and well executed, can prevent greater harm. Mercy, when misplaced, can destroy everything. Then let that settle in. Because this idea sounds brutal until we apply it to the real world. Imagine a leader who refuses to punish betrayal because they don't want to seem harsh. Imagine a parent who never disciplines their child because they're afraid of hurting their feelings. Imagine a friend who watches someone spiral into self-destruction and says nothing because they want to stay supportive. In each of these cases, mercy becomes the mask of fear, and the consequences: long-term damage, chaos, disrespect, collapse. Machiavelli wasn't advocating for cruelty as pleasure, he was advocating for cruelty as clarity. As clarity, a kind of moral surgery. If something threatens the health of a system, a family, a kingdom, or a soul, sometimes it must be cut away. He gives us the example of Caesar Borgia, a ruthless but effective ruler. Borgia, when he needed to establish order in a lawless region, appointed a brutal enforcer, Ramiro di Orco, to carry out harsh punishments. Once stability was achieved, Borgia publicly executed that same enforcer to signal that the cruelty would not continue. One clean, necessary act of violence to prevent endless suffering. Cold? Yes, but effective, strategic, and in the long run merciful. Because what's worse, one sharp act of cruelty that prevents a storm, or endless kindness that leads to ruin. Now, apply this to your life. How many times have you avoided saying what needed to be said? How often have you tolerated disrespect in the name of being the bigger person? Do you forgive people before they've earned it? Do you let destructive patterns continue because you're afraid of being called harsh? Here's the hard truth. Sometimes, the kindest thing you can do is walk away. Sometimes, the most loving thing you can do is say enough. Sometimes, cruelty isn't cruelty, it's honesty with teeth. This isn't about vengeance. It's about responsibility. When you're in a position of influence, whether as a leader, a friend, a parent, or even just over yourself, you have two choices: protect the long-term health of what matters, or protect your image of being a nice person. One serves the greater good, the other serves your ego. And Machiavelli is ruthless in asking us, which one are you really choosing? The danger of mercy is that it often disguises conflict avoidance. We don't want to confront, so we call it compassion. We don't want to make hard decisions, so we label it empathy. But is it truly empathy to let someone continue doing harm unchecked? Is it truly compassion to allow chaos to fester because we don't want to get our hands dirty? Machiavelli forces us to see that sometimes the most ethical action is also the harshest. Not because we desire pain, but because we desire order, clarity, justice. And here's the twist: when cruelty is used sparingly, with intention and discipline, it doesn't breed fear alone, it breeds trust. People may flinch in the moment, but deep down, they respect those who are willing to do what's necessary. They know you're not swayed by emotion. They know you're not afraid to act. And in a world full of indecision and moral theatrics, that kind of resolve is rare and powerful. So ask yourself, what's one area of your life where you've been too merciful for too long? Where have you allowed decay in the name of compassion? And what would it look like to act not with cruelty for cruelty's sake, but with the courage to be misunderstood in service of what's right? Because the truth is, mercy without boundaries is not love, it's surrender. And as Machiavelli shows us, sometimes the sharpest knife heals more than it harms. Unbreakable power, how fear creates order when love fails. There comes a point in every life, in every leadership, in every relationship, where love stops working. Not because love isn't valuable, but because it isn't enough. Love is fragile, it's emotional, it's often irrational. It asks for trust, but it cannot compel it. It invites loyalty, but cannot guarantee it. And in moments of crisis, when order begins to slide, when stakes rise, when people become unpredictable, love falters. It hesitates, it hopes. But fear acts. Fear stabilizes. Fear creates order when love is not strong enough to hold the line. This is the essence of Machiavelli's most controversial insight, that fear is more reliable than love. And not because people are inherently evil, but because they are inherently self-interested. When everything is calm, love may bind people together. But when pressure builds, when pain enters the equation, when survival instincts take over, people drift. Emotions fade. Affection turns to blame. And in that moment, when everything is on the verge of collapse, people cling to what they respect, but to what they fear. We think of fear as something dark, something to eliminate. But that's only half the story. Fear, when cultivated correctly, is a form of structure. But it tells people where the limits are. It defines the rules. It draws the invisible lines that love alone cannot enforce. It says, you may not cross this, and that clarity creates safety. Not just for the one in power, but for everyone under that power. Because when people understand the boundaries, they know what to expect. They may not like the system, but they can trust it. And in a world filled with chaos, trust in structure is more precious than affection. Look around you. Every stable system is built on a foundation of fear, not terror, but consequence. Governments function because laws are enforced. Families stay grounded when discipline is present. Organizations thrive when accountability is real. Even your own self-respect grows when you fear disappointing your higher principles. So ask yourself, what keeps your life in order? Love for the outcome, or fear of the cost of failure? What ultimately motivates you to do what must be done when nobody is watching? This is the secret Machiavelli knew. Fear is not the opposite of love, it is its guardian. It is the force that steps in when love is no longer strong enough to hold people accountable. It is the unyielding spine that supports the soft tissues of kindness, generosity, and empathy. Without it, those virtues collapse under pressure. They become performative, hollow, toothless. But here's the part no one talks about. It is possible to be feared without being hated. But that's the real art. Machiavelli stressed that a ruler should avoid being hated at all costs. Hatred breeds rebellion. But fear, if grounded in justice, fairness, and consistency, can coexist with admiration. It can even breed love over time, a deeper, more resilient kind. The kind that doesn't depend on charm, but on character. So who do you want to be? The leader who is loved until they make a hard decision and then abandoned? Or the one who is feared just enough to be obeyed, respected, and ultimately trusted to lead through the storm? This is not about becoming cold or cruel. It's about becoming unbreakable, about building a foundation that doesn't collapse when emotions shift. Because in the end, love is a gift, but fear is a tool. Love is given freely, but fear is built deliberately. And when love fails, which it will, at times fear is what keeps the structure standing. So the final question is this: are you building your life on the shifting winds of how people feel about you, or on the unshakable ground of what they know you will do? Because when love fades and masks fall, only one thing remains: the silent, steady respect that fear commands. Use it wisely, and you'll never have to beg for loyalty again.